lots to talk about on crime and punishment in a couple of minutes, with this proposed virtual abolition of jail sentences of under 1 year, the end of the short, sharp shock, potential chemical castration of paedophiles. But let's start with the question, when is a U-turn not quite a U-turn? Let's just have a look at Mr Starmer yesterday.
I recognise that people are still feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis, including pensioners. And as the economy improves, we want to make sure people feel those improvements in their days as their lives go forward. And that is why we want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. As you would expect, Mr Speaker, we will only make decisions we can afford. That is why we will look at that as part of a fiscal event.
Nothing to do with Runcorn, nothing to do with the local elections, nothing to do with reform, nothing to do with that at all. Right?
I thought it was very interesting that... and this debate would have happened in Downing Street. They'd have said, look, we're going to essentially U-turn the policy, but then they're going to have to describe or explain why they're doing this. Yep. And they've taken a view which I think is quite risky, saying that because the economy is growing, they can afford to do this. The problem with that is that if the bad figures at the end of the year, there's no suggestion they're going to put it back on. No. So it's a very difficult, risky argument. He could have said, look, I've listened to the voters. I think he did spin that last week, or his team did, the Prime Minister. He said, he could have said, I'm listening to the voters, I hear you, and we're going to reverse the policy. And been a bit more straightforward, I think, about why they've done.
Did you find it hard to keep a straight face, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, look, it is a U-turn, and that is a good thing, because it's been pretty clear that this was a very unpopular decision. We've talked about it umpteen times on the show. When they first announced it, it was obvious to me it was going to be unpopular, because fundamentally they were taking away money from pensioners at Christmas time. And Labour MPs, Labour voters in the country have been saying to them, we don't agree with this policy, please think again. And the government have thought again. And I think that's actually a good thing, by the way. If we get into this sort of culture where politicians aren't allowed to respond to what people are saying to them.
But it was an extraordinary thing.
Hang on, whose U-turn is it? So, you know, we're now sort of being encouraged to think that Keir Starmer wasn't really pro it that much in the first place and had been led by the Treasury. Is that true? Does that mean that the battle has been lost, or that he's won, or is it just that, you know, it's gone down so badly, something had to be done?
The Treasury, the civil servants in the Treasury have always hated this policy. I mean, I was a Treasury Special Advisor years ago. You were the actual boss of the Treasury. And the reason they've hated it is because...
Hated the winter payment or
because
the change?
The winter payment. Right. Because basically, pensioners now get... I mean, pensioners might not agree with this, but the Treasury thinks pensioners now get a pretty generous uprating in their pension every year called something called the triple lock. Yeah. And the Treasury argue, if you're getting the triple lock every year, why do you need additional payment at winter time?
Well, we now know why, because there are so many more millions falling into poverty.
And what was extraordinary to me...
Which is worrying that they didn't think about
Kate,
that or...
What was extraordinary to me was that the Tories were in power for 14 years. You can bet your bottom dollar this was presented every year to every Tory Chancellor, and they said, why don't you think about taking away winter fuel payment? And every single time, people said no. So it was very odd.
Well done
Labour
to say no to that. There might be some other things people would have liked you to say yes or no to along the way as well.
Of course. Yeah. But I'm talking about this particular issue, and that was why it was surprising to me that they went down that route, because, as I said, in this particular issue, the Tories said we can't go down this because it's too unpopular.
The key thing is now they've got to get on with it, right? I think they've got to make this decision quickly, because pensioners need to know where they stand on this.
And what does quickly mean in the politicians' world? Are people going to get their winter fuel payment back this Christmas, and who is going to get it and how many more?
That is the key question. And actually, on this system, or the way this works is, because the computer system that decides who gets it and who doesn't get it is so old and clunky, unless they make the decision soon, you could leave pensioners until next year, just because the IT system is such an old-fashioned IT system. So They need to make the decision quickly so they can get the computer system ready to organise the payment.
How exposed is this leaving Keir Starmer as the Labour leader? I mean, we were saying yesterday, I mean, the Labour aren't like the Tories. They don't defenestrate their leaders every 10 seconds. But he clearly, his position must be weakening. I mean, we've seen this leaked memo apparently from Angela Rayner, basically sticking her finger into the tax pie and giving Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, advice to raise taxes rather than cut spending. So cutting right across the authority of the Prime Minister. And yesterday on this programme, we had Diane Abbott, the mother of the House, a long-term Labour MP, and this is what she had to say about the Prime Minister not being a very good leader.
Well, he's done quite well with international staff, but basically he's a manager rather than a politician, and very good at being a manager. But being a politician has got to be something else, and he doesn't quite seem to have the something else.
Is it something that Starmer's going to have to look at, reasserting his authority over his own party?
I mean, well, first of all, I mean, Diane's a very, very left-wing member of Parliament, and she was a big Jeremy Corbyn supporter. So she would say that.
You would expect her to say that.
I mean, she's a very respected figure, obviously, and we should listen carefully to what Diane has to say all the time. But, you know, she's never been a Keir Starmer supporter. I mean, I think Angela Rayner's a superstar and one of the brightest sparks in the Labour cabinet, a big friend of hers, and she's within her rights to put forward her ideas and suggestions on tax, but in the end, that's up to Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. Look, all Prime Ministers, the longer they're in office, have people saying, oh, you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that. That's the nature of politics. But he's got a big, big majority in the House of Commons. He's delivered loads of Labour MPs in constituencies that you would never expect to go Labour, in truth. And I think they will stay loyal to him. They'll begin to speak out more on things they disagree with. That's healthy, actually, in politics, to be honest. If you should be able to put forward your opinion. But he, as Prime Minister, he is secure, and he will be the Labour leader for as long as he wants to be, in my mind. I imagine him fighting the next election.
Look, he's got a big problem. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. You've got people on the left, like Diane Abbott, who are saying that we shouldn't be cutting benefits at all, we shouldn't be cutting spending, and we should be increasing tax on rich people. You've got a Treasury, a Chancellor who isn't going down that route because we know that she wants to reduce spending and reduce spending on benefits. And the Prime Minister has to basically tread a path between these two views. And it'll be increasingly difficult for him to do that. And I think you say that you're right, that over days and years and months, people do say, oh, the Prime Minister should do this, should do that. The majority was so large last year that it's very surprising to a lot of people that the Prime Minister's in the difficulties he's in after, 10 months? I think the election was 10 months ago. So it's very challenging for him.
Yeah. But politics is challenging.
It is.
Of course, and I guess it should be, and we should be holding them to account along the way, shouldn't we? Should we talk law and order?
Yeah.
Yes.
So David Gauke's review and these proposals published this morning. We've got him on the show, actually, after 8 o'clock to talk in detail about it. Some really surprising things that are being considered in his report. And, on the front page of The Sun, probably the most extreme one. It is mentioned that it could be that there should be chemical castration of, sexual offenders, paedophiles. And this has been suggesting, actually, the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, is considering this. I mean, that's an extreme side of this. What do you make of that, first of all?
Well, look, we were talking about the divisions within the Labour Party. I don't see any chance of a Labour Justice Secretary introducing a policy like that.
Would it be a good idea if she did?
No, I don't think that's the right thing to do. But I just think
hugely popular.
It is popular, and I think they're trying to dance to a kind of reform right-wing populist tune, and that's not going to work because they're just not convincing enough on that. But I don't know why they've allowed that to be spun, because people will be disappointed.
Because it's in the review.
Yeah, but they've obviously said, OK, this is something we're looking at.
I mean,
she could have
David
ruled it out.
Gauke was a former Conservative Justice Secretary. So, this is something that...
David Gauke's not proposing that.
No, he's not.
It's in there.
No, it's in his...
He's not proposing mandatory.
Recommendations for consideration. It's there in black and white.
So, look, my view is the government have basically said, look, we're considering it, but they're not going to do it.
No.
Okay.
And I think that in a way, you're marching people up the hill and then marching them down again.
And not
That's
for the first time. I mean, I think I've covered this story 100 times in the last 50 years.
That's right.
paedophiles and rapists. So, OK, so we're agreed that's not going to happen. All right, let's look at the more practical proposal then, which does look as if it might well come in, that simply because of prison overcrowding, we're no longer going to sentence minor criminals to what we used to call the short, sharp shock. Anything under 1 year, they'll get either a heavier fine, community service, have their driving licence taken away, those kinds of punishments. But the days of a short, sharp shock in prison could be over.
So, look, I'm quite liberal on this because I think that one of the problems with the short, sharp shock was that people would go in for a short time and become more criminalised and meet bad influences. And when they were out, they would repeat offence. So I'm not convinced that the short, sharp shock worked as well as we wanted it to. And yes, there is a problem. We've debated this many, many times. There's a problem with the fact that, you know, we don't have enough prison places. So I can see the logic of this.
The Conservatives didn't build any.
Yeah. I mean, look, we can beat up the last Conservative government.
But what about the notion of punishment as opposed to rehabilitation? I mean, if I'm walking down the high street this afternoon and someone comes up and smashes me in the face and knocks out 3 teeth, I want him to go to jail.
They'll get more than a year. But if they get more than a year, then they should serve the full.
Well, I mean, even if it's only for 6 months.
So my view on this is that we should actually get people to serve the actual sentence they're given. Because the problem that you would have if you were attacked is that, yes, your assailant might go to jail. But if the judge says, oh, you're going to do 4 years, they'll be out after 2.
Yeah.
That, I think, is a complete scandal.
But I think we've got to have, I mean, you're right, and we've got to have this honest debate, because those thugs and villains, like the one who's assaulting you in the street, they're bouncing in and out of prison on these sentences. And actually, when they're going to prison, they're learning more tricks of the trade.
I think that's true.
I mean, it's not working. I agree with you.
So some of the things he talks about then, the incentivising of early release by good behaviour and genuine reform, would that be something that you both support?
I'm not. I definitely think if the judge says 4 years, I can't think of a reason why you would have less than that.
Well, I guess because the prison's massively overcrowded.
True, but there's a sense in which it's almost meaningless. If a judge lays down a sentence and then you only serve maybe 40% of it or 50% of it, that sentence
But this is the problem the government is trying to solve.
That's right.
The fact there are no places.
And we've discussed this. And one of the things that they've said is that they want to build more prison places. I mean, they're committed to doing that.
Yes, but that doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't.
So in terms of solving this, keeping the community and all of us safe and also the prison officers safe, what do we think about these proposals? For instance, Chief Inspector of Probation, Martin Jones, has said that it will have catastrophic consequences, early release, and prisoners serving their sentence in the community. It's just the situation in the probation service is not set up for this.
Yeah, I mean, they're making the argument because they're not properly resourced as a probation service to put in place the wider support that would be needed to work with these ex-prisoners to help properly rehabilitate them. And there's also another question about, you know, a lot of this, or part of the picture here is often alcohol abuse, drug misuse, and we know that those services are never as good as they should be, and we should make sure that people are getting access to drug abuse services.
And that's one of the proposals, isn't it, that, for instance, perhaps female pregnant presenters, they should definitely be locked up. Female prisoners who are pregnant or have children, or offenders who have drug and alcohol things. They should be looked at differently in terms of going to prison because of the longer-term consequences.
All of this, in the end, though, comes down to government spending. It comes down to money. And we started the discussion about, you know, the winter fuel payment, and you were rightly saying that Rachel Reid, the Chancellor, has got all these pressures on tax and spending. And when it comes down to it, politicians of all parties would rather stand up there and say we're putting more money into schools and hospitals than putting the money into prisons and probation. That's just the raw politics of it.
Well, whatever you think about the early release of female presenters, that was your bring home.
They should be given everything they deserve.
That was your bring home the sausages moment. I loved it. But actually, inspired by the reforms that apparently have been studied by this group who've come up with this report, that have been watched in Texas, studied in Texas, they're talking about early release, I'm sorry to tell you, based on earning your ticket out. There would be in 3 distinct stages. You have the custody stage, where the offenders in prison are incentivised to behave themselves, the post-custody stage, where they're managed under strict supervision and licence conditions, and the at-risk stage, where offenders aren't actively supervised but can be recalled if they commit a new offence. It's called the earned progression model.
Look, that makes sense. I think if you're having a justice system and saying, if you behave well in prison, you might get some time docked off. I think that's reasonable. I think what isn't reasonable is saying you're going to do 4 years and then, as a matter of course, only serving 2 years for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think this earned system, this reward incentive, if you like, for good behaviour makes sense.
OK. Look, in terms of putting on a good show for the media and the wider watching public, Donald Trump is certainly delivering these days.
Crikey,
And I have to say, if you're a world leader, you'd think twice about an invitation to the Oval Office for a cosy chat with the president, because he now insists on doing these things live on camera.
He's rewritten the rules, hasn't he?
He's rewritten the rules.
Yeah.
He insists on doing them live. He's now actually got lighting changes. He's got projection, so you can project videos of his choice without warning. And yesterday, I mean, if you thought the ambush of Zelensky was a heavy watch, what happened to the president of South Africa, who was in there, what he thought was for a nice, cosy, let's rebuild our relationships chat?
He wanted a deal, didn't he? And he was there to do that.
Kick in the you-know-wheres. Let's have a look. He's in for a cup of coffee, gets accused of white genocide.
I mean, it was very old footage, wasn't it, that they used? It wasn't footage since he's been the President Ramaphosa. And this is something that he's talked about quite a lot. And, you know, we know he's changed his immigration policies, but he has welcomed lots of white South African farmers already saying that they're the victims of genocide. I'm not sure he's used before, but, you know, attacks,
discriminatory attacks,
taking land away. Is there any reasoning to this?
So I've always said, right from the start of his second presidency, it's a reality TV show. That's where he earned his stripes. That's where he's earned a lot of his money. And so, of course, he's going to bring people in and humiliate them. That's what he did on his show. Cyril Ramaphosa I've met a few times, and he's a very respectful, very, very calm, I wouldn't say gentle, but he's a very sort of subdued political figure.
How did he handle it? Because it seemed to me he stayed in that space that you described throughout the whole thing.
He was very steady and very calm. I suspect inwardly he was absolutely fuming because, you know, he expects people to do things the right way. He's very respectful himself, and he'd expect people to observe the usual protocols.
Is there any truth in what Trump was saying? Is there any truth in it?
Look, you can't say that no white farmers have been killed. You can't say that. But I think it was very inappropriate for him to bring it up in a public forum like that. I think typically you would...
But Trump supporters would say, if it's true, he's changing the rules to bring attention to something that wouldn't normally be discussed.
But
he would say it was open, honest politics.
He's changing the rules anyway. He didn't have to bring the guy into the White House and humiliate him, essentially.
Well, he's running it like a TV talk show.
Yeah, that's exactly what
it's like
it is.
Jeremy Kyle.
Yeah, he wouldn't. If we said that to him, he would say, I want people to watch my show. I want people to see.
And this issue has sort of been bubbling away, actually. I mean, Trump's been going on about this in the US for a few weeks now. And
supported by Elon Musk with a big campaign.
I mean, absolutely.
Well, Elon's from South Africa. I mean, that's
I mean, that's probably where the connections come from.
There's a lot of that's quite important.
But you're right. This sort of TV show approach to it is extraordinary, isn't it? And again, it does sort of bring it back to actually how well Keir Starmer's handled him. Because the interaction with Keir Starmer, where Keir Starmer got out the invitation for the state
that was Peter Mandelson, wasn't it? Absolutely.
Well, we obviously, Keir Starmer or Peter, whoever it was, worked out it's like a TV show.
Exactly.
So you need to play that game, and he got out that invitation.
Well, you have to
for the visit from the King.
I suppose that you're dealing with the most monumental ego that's ever been in the Oval Office, without question.
Yeah.
A man who unhesitatingly praises himself, without embarrassment, without a blush. He talks about himself in such glowing, positive terms. It takes your breath away. But if you recognise that and blow smoke, basically, which is what our Prime Minister did, he went
then it worked.
A lot of smoke, you know where, and it got the result that we wanted.
But the TV aspect of it and the confrontation and all of that, it's really, really important to understand that it's all about the performance. It's all about...
but then you could argue that a lot of politics is. And I guess the question is it working or not for him? It certainly is.
Well, it works for him. It works for him, but most of us... I mean, would it work in British politics?
I don't think so. I think also the parliamentary side...
sort of figures, aren't we?
You know, he's a president. I mean, essentially, they're like elected monarchs.
It doesn't seem like the sort of things Sir Keir Starmer would take on board and do.
I mean, Boris might have done something.
I can't even see Boris Johnson standing at the lectern outside Number 10 saying, I've just done a beautiful thing. I mean, I just can't see it happening.
It wouldn't be that accent, for sure, would it? It'd be a lot longer words and a lot longer sentences. Shall we talk migration? Sure. So 30,000 failed asylum seekers returned since the election in July. That is a 12% increase on the previous year, and we're not even got up to a year. That's a success for this government, isn't it?
I mean, Labour is getting on with returning people who have failed, that their applications to stay here have been rejected, and they are returning people. And actually, when you look at the figures, it is striking that they appear to be doing a lot better than the previous Conservative government.
There's a much bigger problem here.
There's a but from Kwasi.
Of course there is.
You won't be surprised to know.
No, but there's a much bigger problem because you've got the small boats which have gone up in the last year. You've got they've still got to deal with the backlog. And the fact is, you've got a huge problem, I'm afraid, with the Reform Party, which the last time I looked, is leading the polls by 7 points.
I mean, they're really angry. Reform are really angry about the huge increase in immigration that we had post-Brexit. On social media, they call it the Boris wave now. This huge increase in immigration post-Brexit. When all these Tories told us that Brexit was going to bring down immigration,
absolutely.
they actually went the other way.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was badly handled. But at the same time, this government's got to deal with this. And you've got Reform now on 29%, which, frankly, even at the election, the last general election, they were only on 14%. So they've doubled their support in less than a year.
So the Daily Telegraph has more detail from this leaked memo, not written by Angela Rayner, but by staff, we're now told, and not signed off by her. But if, you know, I think Jonathan's giving a little look there. And I think, you know, I'm being fair. But you know, when these things are written, does anybody ever write those not thinking it's going to come to light? But the latest bit of it that emerged on Tuesday is that both Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves are considering restricting access to the state pension. I mean, that will be popular in some quarters. So if you're a recently arrived immigrant, your benefits and your pension access will be not as accessible. That is the sort of thing that upsets people, isn't it? I mean, when they can't get benefits here and people have recently arrived are getting them.
I mean,
you know?
I mean, absolutely. And what you should have in your benefit system is a system where, you know, where people pay in, you know, that's when you get entitlement. That's actually really how the state pension works. But funnily enough, I remember 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, there were lots of complaints about the Indian trade deal where we were saying that Indian workers wouldn't have to pay NICs, i.e. wouldn't have to be paying in for a state pension, so they don't get a state pension. So it's a sort of, the criticism is now from a slightly different angle, but I think in the end, you've got to have I believe, a system of welfare, whether it's unemployment benefits or pensions, where if people pay in because they're working, then that is reflected in what you get out when you need that support.
I am now going to breach equality laws, OK? It's a little piece of theatre. I invite you to take part in this bit of theatre, right? Well,
I'm apparently going to jail as a female presenter, so good luck to you.
That's only because, according to you. You're putting yourself in the
according to myself.
Right, just a little bit of acting, please. I just want you to tell me something that we're doing in the show later. Just to say.
OK.
Go on, go.
OK. Well, we're doing lots of things in there. Oh, David Gork is here to talk after 8.
Apparently,
seems harsh, doesn't it?
Sighing at one of your employees, at one of your office colleagues, is a breach of equality laws. Non-verbal expressions of disappointment or irritation amount to discrimination, a judge said yesterday. The ruling came in a case of a UK software engineer with ADHD who successfully sued a tech company for disability discrimination after complaining about his manager's sighing and exaggerated exhales, like... and he won.
Extraordinary.
Isn't that something?
I'd be glad of a sigh from my boss. It's usually worse.
I don't know how you can. The enforcement of something like that is very, very difficult. I just think of all the kind of bureaucracy, the form filling, the court trial, all that money spent on whether the man sighed or not, or whether
the insertion of civil law into almost every
aspect of life. Every aspect of life.
I imagine that. I mean, the bar to get to these sorts of tribunals and investigations is pretty high. I mean, this wouldn't have been me just sort of, you know, sighing at some of the daft things you come out with, Kwasi, when we're sat here. I mean, this would have been surely constant in the workplace, I imagine, and that worker would have felt Well, yeah,
And also, once you've established the principle...
quite hard to get to these
Yeah, but Jonathan,
tribunals.
once you've established the principle, you don't know where to draw the line. That's the problem.
I suppose what all these things is when you get into the devil's in the detail, don't you? I think, as Jonathan says, you know, it would have been part of a sense of undermining that was going on between these two working colleagues, boss and employee. That was the tip of the iceberg.
That's a genuine...
You're absolutely...
Not at you, but
absolutely,
I'm
absolutely.
taking notes. You'll
No,
be
no,
called
not
before
you,
a
but what-
tribunal before
Because-
9 o'clock.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I suppose you're right, is that once it's there,
Once you've established the
as
principle,
law, then it
yeah.
becomes
But
even more
where do you
complicated.
draw the line?
doesn't
But
it?
there must have been like a pattern, a sense that there was a pattern of bullying behaviour. That's why it would have got to this tribunal, I'm sure. It wouldn't have been just because an example such as that, because that is natural.
I mean, he was
that is
off
human.
work
That's
with
human
stress,
interplay,
for
absolutely.
starters, so there would be many that would be
Do we know
saying-
how much he was given by way of comment?
I
I
didn't see
don't
that
think it was.
figure.
I don't think
that
it was
released.
disclosed.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's undisclosed.
I mean, depending on the figure, you know, lots of people are going to trying it on. Will try it on. I'm sure.
You're a boss, don't sigh today.
I'm sure. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
why wouldn't they?
Um,
If it's
and
50
one-
grand or something, I mean, why wouldn't you
It won't be that
push that? Well, we don't know. But whatever it is,
Well, I
you're
just think of the
incentivising.
newsrooms that I've worked in over the last half century. If I'd complained about somebody
Who's
sighing
ever
at me.
sighed sighed to you in your
Politics
time?
all the time. Of
course they go.
I mean, even in I mean, I can't say what goes on in cabinet, but if someone says something very stupid, I've seen other people across the table.
I love the way you say someone, not you, and other people. Ever the politician.
Protecting.
Yeah.
But in any meeting, in a political, whether it's the parliamentary party or a cabinet or a ministerial, you know...
Jonathan, who's the
give
great
and take.
sire in Labour?
Oh, who's the great...
You never say.
I mean, there's loads of people who sigh and roll their eyes at me all the time. And, yeah,
Look,
all the time.
I
yeah.
wonder if this will make you roll your eyes or sigh. Let's finish with this. Girl power is defunct. And that's according to one of the Spice Girls, ex-Spice Girls, Jerry Halliwell. She says that in the interest of gender inclusion, we should stop saying girl power, and it should now be inner power. What do we think?
I mean,
Of course, he's not sure.
I'm going to sigh. I don't know what
Definitely saw an eye roll there.
Whatever.
You were trying to suppress it. No, she says that if you look in the dictionary and see what feminism means, it means the equalisation between the sexes. Therefore, to me, it's irrelevant what your gender is. I want everyone to feel their power. So I want to evolve the words or the expression from girl power to inner power. Doesn't have the
girl
same
power.
ring.
I mean, when was the song? I remember the summer they kept. Was it 97?
Around then, yeah.
96,
around
something
then,
like
yeah.
that. It's a
96,
very long
97.
time. I haven't heard anyone use that phrase for about 10 years.
That's except maybe the Spice Girls.
Apart from
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah,
So
all
she's
the
just
ex-Spice
using it
Girls.
to get into the headlines.
Well, look, go and practice not sighing.
Shall
and
we all
rolling
have a
your
bit
eyes.
of inner power?
We'll see you in a couple of hours when we review what we've done on the show this morning. Thank you both for coming in.